And if we think a little bit about the clarification that you mentioned, sometimes you need to explain or you need to explain things to students. If I think back to my own experience when I was starting to teach as an English language teacher, my language awareness wasn't terribly good. I knew a little bit of grammar, I knew what a verb and a noun was, but that was about it. What can teachers do to help develop their language knowledge?
Their language knowledge and their language awareness. Well, obviously all teachers need to have knowledge, and that they impart, it's sometimes called, or that they enable learners to learn about. And in language teaching is no exception. So just as a history teacher needs to know about what happened in the past, a language teacher needs to know about language. And as a native speaker of a language, we may think that we already know the language because our ability to use it is already demonstrated. We do it on a daily basis. This is something that we often call language competence or language proficiency, the ability to use the language. But it isn't necessarily the same thing as as everything the learners need. Learners will develop that themselves through practice. But often they also need the teacher to explain to them stuff about language. So they can explain to them, for example, about why a certain way of saying something is correct or sounds natural, and why another way of saying it may be incorrect or may even cause ambiguity. And understanding enough about the grammar, the pronunciation and the lexis, the vocabulary of a language, to be able to do that. A teacher needs to understand it from a learner's perspective. So a native speaker of, say, English, somebody who has maybe not learnt many foreign languages, or maybe learnt a little bit at school but not to a higher level of proficiency, may never have thought much about grammar in general about languages, for example. And grammar is the most commonly discussed area of language awareness. But they may also not know much about their own language grammar. They may be able to identify whether a sentence is in the past, present or future. But for example, understanding why a particular tense, verb tense, has been chosen, such as the present perfect continuous tense, and understanding that tense is often used in several different ways. When a learner asks a question, teacher, why is that sentence in present perfect continuous, then the teacher needs to understand which of those uses is probably the reason for them using it in that context. So, and they have to be able to explain that, or help the learner to understand it in a way that learner, whose English level is quite low, understands. And that can be a big challenge of language teaching. So as you mentioned in your own experience, and in mine as well, I remember trying to avoid teaching grammar in my initial training because it was so challenging for me. As we gain and develop our proficiency as teachers, we learn about the language. So we learn about the fact that the present perfect tense may have 5 or 6 or even more different uses depending on which grammar source you consult. We learn about that, and we also learn about ways in which we can help learners to understand those different ways and then to apply them in a specific context. And that would be what we're calling language awareness. And that's the knowledge that, while native speakers don't necessarily have much knowledge about the language, because a lot of non-native speakers of English who have learnt the English as a foreign language, often as adults or teenagers, they will often be what we might call expert language learners. And as expert language learners, they're often far more capable of explaining why this speaker has used present perfect tense in this context, and therefore they've often got very well developed language awareness. Even if their competence may not be necessarily the same as a native speaker's competence, it may not be worse, it may be simply a more international competence, their actual language awareness is often much stronger. And that can help them, obviously, as a language teacher, to help and to empathise with other learners in a similar position. And
I think it's probably worth saying that you don't need to learn all of this before you go on an initial service course, an initial teaching course like the CertTESOL. Part of the course and the preparation for the course is learning that, but that you also learn a lot of that through the process of teaching and just through the course itself.
Yeah, exactly. So when you do a course like the CertTESOL, the course providing organisation will always provide you with a little bit of preparation before the course, and that will enable you to become familiar with some of the terminology, what we call the meta language, things like the expressions for talking about different words, noun, verb, adjective, and also how we talk about tenses and how we describe language usage. So that will provide, the pre-course preparation will provide that. When you start the course, you still won't be an expert, but you'll also have the support often of the tutors and materials such as course books that will help you to understand what you're teaching, what your aims are for the lesson in which you're teaching it, and exactly how to go about achieving those aims. So the key thing is when you're teaching a bit of language and you're still not an expert, as many of us aren't when we do these courses, we in fact have very little knowledge, the key thing is you have an opportunity to prepare for the lesson you're teaching and to demonstrate your language awareness for that lesson. And the course itself will provide you with the skills you need to research, to prepare, and to get the materials ready to teach that lesson.
Okay, thanks.